Some of the things that characterize a tier two in this system, again, is our standardized evidence-based interventions that can be implemented in a relatively quick response time. We don't want students who are indicating that they need more support. We don't want them to be lingering and not getting support for weeks on end. Students that may be at risk of developing problem behaviors. Now, that doesn't always mean that those are outward behaviors. Sometimes we see students that are withdrawn, or we know that they're experiencing difficulties at home. So it doesn't always have to be those outward behaviors that are right in our face. Some of the possible supports that we might see in tier two are small groups, like skill instruction, skill-based, teaching the skills that they need, emotional regulation, self-reg, or teaching peer interactions, things like that. The social skills that students need on a day-to-day basis are sometimes lacking for students that are 5 and students that are 18, right? We all know that most students don't come to us with all of those skills. There are decision rules that are created by the PBIS team to maintain an objective kind of integrity, so that we are making decisions based on just specific, already set rules. It's not subjective. It's not, we feel like this kid needs tier 2 supports. This is in PBIS. And then there are allocated resources, both time and financial. So it might be buying materials to build that social skills group, but administrative support so that there are resources available. There's always progress monitoring, because we want to make sure that what we put in place is working. And again, it is function-based. We are thinking about why the students are behaving the way they are. What are they communicating to us? So these are characteristics of PBIS Tier 2. So what our conversations, we are trying to make sure that we recognize that there's a need for immediate help in students that are definitely exhibiting challenging behaviors due to lots of things, including coming off the pandemic, still being in the pandemic actually, and not being in school, having some social deficits due to that, multiple reasons. And so we want you to be aware of the framework, but we also know that those things need to be addressed. So we're being very conscious about giving you Kay and Patty, and that this team is, we're all working together to make sure that you have both. You have an understanding of the framework, but also that that they can help to identify some interventions that you can use now that fit within the framework. And as the framework is being built, it will just be integrated and melt together. Kay, can you say it better? Because I know you always have the words.
No, that was perfect. And I think the exciting piece of that is we knew going into this year that PBIS Tier 2 training was going to be on your plate. And so we were really trying to guide some of your care team work and your thinking towards that Tier 2 piece, because it seems like it's the Tier 2 kids that there's just such a range from, they just need a little help, to, boy, we don't want them to move up into Tier 3. And so I just think this is a learning process for all of us, and we are just so excited to be able to work with Debbie and Val. So no, you said it very eloquently. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yep.
Any questions? Any questions for Debbie from our group? You're welcome to raise your hand or put any questions in the chat room for anybody. Okay, Debbie, thank you very much. And
thank you for having me. Thanks.
You're welcome. So one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted Debbie and Val to be able to give you more of that overarching big picture of connecting PBIS to care teams. What we want to do now is our next guest is Kathleen Toth, and she is a behavior intervention specialist from the Stark County Educational Service Center. So it's always delightful when her office is right outside of Patty's. So it's always delightful when you truly get a chance to sit and talk to your colleagues a little bit deeper about what they do and how they're able to help our students and families. And so we've been having conversations with Kathleen for months. And one of the things that we really wanted to find an expert to bring to the Care Team Roundtable was somebody who just really understands student behavior and really could just help our care teams in thinking through, especially around the Tier 2 students. And so I would like to welcome Kathleen to our roundtable. Kathleen's going to, you'll notice on this slide that Kathleen is going to take over the presentation here in just a minute or two, and she has her own slides. So Kathleen, I'd love to welcome you to our space. And I'm going to have you just share whatever you need. Before we do that, it looks like Tabitha has raised her hand. So Tabitha, would you like to open your mic and ask the question that you have for us?
I'm pressing buttons. I apologize. I was trying to get back in. Please forgive me. I'm so sorry.
Oh, okay. But this is Tabitha from Canton City, who we love. So it's nice to see you. Okay, so Kathleen, if you just want to give us just a little bit of your background, and then please, the floor is yours, and Patty and I will man the chat room. And those of you that are here on our meeting, we are recording the meeting. I was just chuckling. I was trying to do so many things with my sticky note that says record that fell off my laptop. So probably just as Debbie was talking, we started recording this meeting. So just want to make sure everybody is aware of that. Okay, Kathleen, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. Good morning. My name is Kathleen Toth. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. And as Kay mentioned, also working as a behavior intervention specialist for the Stark County ESC. I'm just going to start with a short story, a little strategy that I learned in a presentation long ago when I was actually a paraprofessional back in Chicago. I went to a presentation, and the presenter was an autistic adult woman that was absolutely brilliant, and gave this 2-day PD on meltdowns and tantrums, and kind of in the beginnings of when I started really being interested in behavior. And when the presentation started, she was waiting for people to come. She had all these sort of like images up on the screen. It was like farm animals and a motorcycle and all these things. And she explained that she has those things kind of going at the beginning of presentations because it's comforting things to her and things that kind of make her feel at ease. So I was like, all right, cool. Like I'm gonna put a picture of my family. I have 2 children and my husband. And these are things that kind of make me feel calm. And then I started thinking about it a little deeper, and I was like, you know what? Pizza and tacos, those are also some things that put me at ease, or maybe something I have a goal to get to and enjoy maybe later today. So just starting there. In other background information, I have a master's degree in applied behavior analysis. Long ago, I worked in like a finance job actually, and sort of stumbled into education and had kind of, as I mentioned, I was a paraprofessional. And in that work, I kind of, decided that I absolutely loved, the energy of the educational setting, and wanted to learn more. So that's where, I pursued my master's and wanted to kind of learn more about the behavior piece. I've also worked as a behavior specialist up at the Monarch Center for Autism up in Cleveland. I do some, and through that, I also became a behavior consultant for the Stark Board of DD over at Eastgate Preschool. And that kind of connected my worlds from Cleveland to Eastgate to the ESC. So my role as a behavior intervention specialist, I do a lot of support for the ESC classrooms and programs. My first year, my office was over at Day Integrated Learning Center, the separate facility that the ESC runs. So, and I'll dive a little deeper into that, that experience for a second. But so, I provide that program-wide classroom and student-specific support for our ESC kiddos, and then also received referrals for district consult. So, districts that may need some support in completing an FBA for a student, helping teams develop intervention plans, and then, just some generalized district consult, which is super cool as I'm learning, more about the whole PBIS framework and really developing a passion there. I just, the idea of that kind of larger systemic support is definitely, I think a really great way to move when we think about kind of that over, kind of far reaching change, in the way that we're supporting a lot of kids versus just one. So in further to that, as I mentioned, my first year, I had my office over at Day, and even just kind of noticing some of the referrals that I was getting, kind of for these for tier 3 intervention plans were they were coming to me sort of in that framework, right? And I would do a functional behavior assessment, and we're going to talk a little bit further about that and the kind of the process there. But, I found myself having a really hard time helping teams implement these sort of like really rogue intervention plans in the classroom. And I was like, why is this so hard? It feels like, that we're kind of trying to help this one kid in this kind of really unique way, but what's going on at like the classroom level? So that really was sort of like my aha moment or moments, or a whole year of aha in terms of, learning a little bit more about what does it mean to have a tier 1 system of supports in your classroom, and how, and so, I dove in and actually we at Day we started working with Val in a kind of a unique way, just because, while the framework for PBIS is, as mentioned by Debbie, it is that it's this great framework, but, it still has like some elements of uniqueness depending on, what the needs of the building are. So, really long story short, from that, we launched into developing a PBIS tier 1 framework for that separate facility building. So still following the same kind of the rules of all those, tiered supports, but making it work for that building. And we saw a huge change in those reactive responses that were really, really prominent my first year. So, all day, every day, it felt like we were sort of like putting out fires. And so that, which is a hard place to be as a student, and a really hard place to be as, a staff member, because that's just, stressful. And again, when we think about, most importantly, not the best learning environment for students. So again, that was sort of my like, whoa, like with the next year, we started just really, getting a consistent sense of, those expectations for students, similar language. We used our system of reinforcement and all of those things. And again, just saw huge changes and the lack of need for those more intensive kind of plans, as Debbie mentioned, because through it all, we kind of, and I think the theme that we're all going to kind of keep going back to is, when you have a really strong base, that tier 1 base, the need to go into further intervention becomes lesser. So that was just kind of, a little history for me. So I know you guys have a copy of this. This is just a brief agenda of kind of what we're going to go over. So being a behavior intervention specialist and a BCBA, I'm never going to miss an opportunity to go into a little more behavior science, but I do think it's really important, because when we talk about things like developing intervention plans that are function-based and having a true understanding of what behavior is, like it just in its kind of raw form, I think it's important to kind of rewind and really go over just, some behavior 101, if you will. So I'm going to just go really briefly into the two primary types of behavior. So the first one being respondent behavior. So behavior that, that we don't learn. It's kind of those reflex behaviors. It's elicited or brought out by the stimuli that occur immediately preceding it. So what we're mainly going to be talking about today is the next slide, which is operant behavior, right? Behavior that's determined by the consequences. But this, that was a cool, kind of cool review of and how humans are just super fascinating and neat because, this is behavior that's involuntary, such as like blinking when something comes near your eye. We don't have to learn to do that. That happens as soon as we're a baby, that, like a blushing behavior, or even like salivating when you smell something delicious. For me, pizza and tacos. But so just a quick reminder there. And, this is just a product of that natural evolution, as it may have survival value for species. So next type of behavior is again, what we're going to kind of be talking a lot about, and what, we're mostly working with our students, is that operant behavior. So behavior whose probability of occurrence is determined by its history of consequences, right? So that's like a really like paramount line for me. So when we talk about understanding the function of behavior, it is because that behavior has resulted in a certain consequence historically. So that consequence is then going to determine the likelihood of that behavior to increase or decrease. So we'll kind of keep diving in there. So that's a voluntary action when we think about, like, again, like a learned, something that, we learn, again, based on consequences, and it's defined in terms of its relationship to the function. So again, we'll dive a little further, but that's that attention, that escape, that access to something, or someone or an activity, and then that's kind of sensory automatic consequence. So quick review, the term antecedent, I know that probably comes up often. Another word might be like trigger. So that's the event or action or circumstances that occur immediately before a behavior. I like this meme because I feel like this comes up, and I just think it's kind of funny. So there's no such thing as no antecedent. I think what's hard for us as team members that are supporting students is sometimes it's really hard to figure out what it is, right? Because it's not always clear. So, the process of going through a functional behavior assessment or data recording and things like that is what's going to help us kind of determine, at least maybe we don't know exactly what it is, but we might start seeing some patterns and things like that. So again, I just say that because there's always something. It's just kind of sometimes a mystery to figure out what it is that might be, occurring, in the environment or even within a person that might, result in some behaviors that are unexpected. So next is, on the other side of behavior is the term consequences. So I always like to I bring this one up because I think, in our head, we always think like, and I hear it a lot, like, there must be consequences. So, and I always think, well, they're out there, no matter, every behavior that we're all doing all the time is followed by consequences. And sometimes I don't know that we realize that those consequences might be reinforcing instead of or punishing and things like that. So I just like to review this definition because, really the true kind of raw definition is that change in environment directly following a behavior. So future behavior is determined by those consequences. And then I like this term, behavior goes where reinforcement flows. So I like to think of that because I think sometimes we think we're maybe doing something that would make behavior decrease, but it's either staying the same or maybe even increasing. So maybe we have to kind of think about, maybe the consequence that's happening after that behavior is different than we intended or different than we realized. So breaking that down a little further. So the definition of reinforcement. So process that occurs when a stimulus or change occurs following a behavior and it increases the future frequency. So again, that's super important to think about because a lot of times I'll hear, people maybe mention like we're providing positive reinforcement, which, with best intent, but if it isn't actually reinforcing to that individual, maybe we need to think outside the box or kind of, rethink what reinforcement means to that person. And if it's not truly reinforcing, then, that it's not going to give us the results that we'd like. And then in the opposite, that punishment. So again, in its raw definition, it's a process that occurs when stimulus change follows the behavior, and that behavior decreases in the future. Again, just in certain experiences I've had, and I always share this one, like, well, we've taken recess away for the last week, and but the behavior is still occurring. So, something that we might intend to be sort of like punishing, or, like with best intent, right? We want someone's behavior to change for the better. So, but we also have to think, okay, maybe that's not quite, having the result that we might have thought. Maybe they like staying inside from recess because they have one-on-one attention with an adult or something like that. So just always things to think about. I always note too with punishment, or a punishment procedure, that we might, it should always be, we would never just put a punishment procedure in place for a behavior plan. It should always be following exhaustive efforts with a positive reinforcement plan, and still paired with reinforcement for expected behaviors. I just like to put that caveat out there. And then third is extinction, the process of extinction. So a procedure that occurs when previously reinforced response is discontinued. So again, that behavior decreases in the future or maybe completely goes away. I always put a caution statement here. This is a really tricky one, which would only be done in a situation where you can truly remove that reinforcing or the previously reinforcing consequence. And it gets tricky because I think the most powerful sort of reinforcement that can sort of get sort of mixed into this to an extinction procedure is that intermittent reinforcement. So reinforcement that maybe doesn't happen on a very like fixed interval. I like to use the slot machine kind of scenario. If I keep pulling the handle and nothing happens, but I do it 50 more times and finally that happens, that's going to actually strengthen and potentially increase my behavior of trying to get that sort of the winnings to come. So if we hold out on reinforcement, let's just say we have a planned ignoring extinction plan, and then something happens where we have to respond after quite a long time of the behavior, then, we actually potentially were like, oh, the student just knows they've got to try it 75 times and then we'll respond. So again, but good to know the definition and can work wonderfully, in certain circumstances. Okay, back to just kind of reviewing that function. So all behavior serves a purpose for the individual, and that's all of us all day, every day. I tell a joke on a presentation, and the audience laughs. I might be more likely to tell that joke again. If I tell it and people seem offended or ticked off, I may think about using that joke again. So, again, just all of our interactions all day, all of our behavior is, based on the function that it serves. So first noting that attention, so response from those around the individual. So I always note that, sometimes this can even be like the most minuscule response or reaction to student behavior in this case, right? Like an eye roll or a sigh or a tense of the body. I feel like students are very aware, or just, humans in general, of another person's kind of response. So, and then, we know that attention can come in the forms that seem positive or negative, but if it's attention or connection that person is seeking, they may not, be really care what form it's coming in. That escape avoidance of a less preferred task, environment, situation, and then access to a desired item, a tangible or activity or a person is the next function that is listed. And then lastly, the sensory automatic function. So the behavior feels good, provides comfort or input to the individual. And going back to kind of I feel like when we have a little bit of a harder time maybe understanding what the antecedent to a behavior is, sometimes there's more likely that there could be something kind of internal or automatic being served in that sense, when it's a little harder to see the trigger. Not always, but that's where I'm kind of like, oh, maybe there's something where we're like, why all of a sudden is this occurring? And so considering those sensory needs and what that person is kind of gaining from the behavior is something to maybe consider there. Again, I just note that like being aware of our behavior when we think about function and consequences to ensure that we're not inadvertently providing reinforcement for unexpected behavior. So, I just gave a couple examples here, such as, if a student's shouting out, the adult goes closer to them, redirects them to be quiet. So that attention is, being provided directly following the behavior. A student swipes math materials, the assignment's removed, giving that escape to the math assignment. Student wants to play with the toy, it's not time, student begins to cry, the toy is given. So in a sense, that student accesses the toy. But again, these are just kind of like classic examples, because again, when we don't want someone to feel upset or, so, and some of these things, can kind of make the behavior stop, but, we're also, when we look at what's happening, directly following a behavior, we need, note that if these things are occurring, and it feels reinforcing, or it is reinforcing to that student, the likelihood for the behavior to continue is there. And then that sensory automatic. So, student feels anxious when in large groups, maybe engages in some self-injury, and it provides that comforting input. And these, these are often hard, challenging to intervene with, right? Because that student has, kind of developed something that, they can kind of access all the time, and feels, comforting, or provides that input at that time. So I always just note that one, obviously, and through this all, I really like the idea of what Debbie mentioned in terms of like the team approach. So, especially if we're dealing with like a student that's maybe seeking sensory input or something like that, I might of course be consulting with, other members of the team to get a better understanding of how we can help that student kind of replace this type of input with maybe a different, more appropriate, less potentially dangerous input. So again, I love that focus on it's all kind of that takes a village type of mentality to really understand a student and develop plans that are going to be, done to fidelity and done well. So putting that all together, I feel like, that the ABCs, that antecedent behavior consequence. So understanding, when we look and when I go in for, a student observation, I should have an example of this. Like my notes are always kind of done in time increments. And then I just like scribble A, B, and C up at the top of my paper. And I'm looking, I kind of noting those B's that are, the target behaviors or behaviors of concern, and just trying to make, quick notes of what's happening before and what's happening after, so that we can kind of see, okay, if we look at kind of all these sort of instances of unexpected or target behavior, what are we most often seeing before and what are we seeing after? Because that's going to help us, kind of inform our next steps. So I won't go too deep in this because I know we got a good briefing on that, but just just a quick blurb on those tier 1 supports. Now that we've got our kind of behavior 101 in our brains, so those systems data and tier 1's that systems data and practices that impact everyone across all settings. Again, establishing that foundation for proactive support and preventing unwanted behavior. So I think that's, when we make that connection to the term antecedent and antecedent strategies, setting up our environment in a way that target behaviors or maladaptive behaviors are less likely to occur. This is where the tier 1 supports are uber important, right? We're setting up students for success. We're pre-teaching and providing information and kind of all of the things that might make a behavior that, we don't want to see less likely to occur. I always say this too, because I feel like in, our development of tier 1 supports today, I'm like, what, I always ask people, what makes your room awesome? What are the things that I know as a student, when I walk into this building or this classroom, I can count on, I can expect, I know what I'm going to be, I know what I need to do. I know what my rules are. I know what they specifically mean. And I know what this day looks like and where I'm headed. So again, just a huge, kind of highlight of how important those supports are. So this is just an example. This is the matrix that we use at day. But, again, just how they're kind of broken down and then taught even further, those proactive preventative interventions, reliant on the expectations as deemed for each building and district. And, I feel like they often have, pretty like similar type of themes in terms of what they cover. And then, the wording and whatnot is possibly a little different, but I think a huge change that, and that was really successful at Day when we talked about implementing tier 1 supports was really getting staff consistent with saying this language in the same way. So it would be, I feel like, spring after the first year, we were kind of implementing this language, hearing staff use the term like, again, using positively framed language, we use neutral and kind words. Like, when a student might be using some other choice language, that expected language and teaching and diving into words, tone, and volume, and just, kind of just hearing people really use the language in the same way and how important that really is. So we're gonna, and I know I'm so excited because, I know we're going to get some really in-depth tier 2 training, like coming down the pipeline here. And that's gonna go really, really deep into all of like the systems elements of the tier 2 PBIS support. So as Debbie had mentioned, that the tier 2 supports are, and I really like this term because I think Val had mentioned it a couple of times when we met with like students that need an extra scoop or a couple extra scoops of like support. And I was like, oh, that's such a cool way to think about it. So that might be like, a term we hear often throughout the year. And again, trying to move in as soon as we kind of can when we start to see a student, acting in a way that is unexpected, especially compared to, that 80% of students that we would, kind of expect to be in that tier 1, or, the vast majority. So this again, I think is, this is a really, just kind of quick trip to the decision-making rules. So when we talk about, how do we understand that it's time for a student to move to like a tier 2 plan? And this would be, outlined in district or school or building teams. But these decision-making rules are what's going to help us. And again, that's not, I shouldn't feel like me as a solo teacher is making a decision and unsure, like, oh, wait, is it time? Is it not time? Like, you as your team, again, when we talk about kind of that group approach to any plan like this, there should be some of these rules that, kind of like trip and indicate, okay, it's time. So some examples of those might be like multiple office referrals, need for additional support or like removal from a classroom, unexpected behaviors that are more frequent than other students. And then perhaps some of those other things noted, like some deeper teaching into some social emotional skills or things like that. And then, as we noted that, through that process, making sure that everybody that's going to, we've kind of decided that we're going to move into this tier 2 plan. Does everyone sort of know their role? I think that's, again, going to be kind of part of the kind of PBIS policy and framework and the systems that, are potentially, kind of unique to your specific buildings in terms of who manages those roles. But, overall, it's incredibly important to know, who is kind of designing a plan, who's explaining a plan to the student and the family, who's going to be responsible for monitoring the data and then adjusting the plan as possible. Just to go back to what Debbie says, I feel Debbie said, a lot of times, I think we've got, it's easy, right? Because there's a million things happening. But I love the idea of just, a plan, no behavior intervention plan should look the same for an extended period of time, right? We should either be fading some of the supports or making, regardless of what we're doing, we're using data to kind of move the mark. Like, do we need to move in a little closer? Do we need to move, or is it time for a student to kind of, we up the rigor or the expectation in a plan? So I think that's a really good piece to keep in mind, and why it's so important to kind of, know who's on the team and how we're gonna do that, right? Because that feels like, it's a big job to, make sure that we're kind of on top of that. So the delegation of roles, and I think we're gonna, again, have the opportunity to learn a lot more about that as teams in the tier 2 training. But I think that's a good, thought process to be going through in terms of that kind of might already be sort of like informally sort of delegated in teams or formal or in best districts or formally, but and then sometimes not. So I feel like, I've sort of, as I'm learning more about that, kind of the roles that are noted in a tier 2 process, I'm like, oh, I kind of do that when I go out and do referrals in terms of kind of managing, the monitoring process and kind of, developing it and things like that. But, it's going to be a lot potentially more productive and efficient if that role is kind of handled, by someone in the building too. So, so we're going to dive into just an example of what I would call like what I generally call like a daily behavior sheet for a student, but it's very much it's similar and it has the characteristics of that check-in, check-out process. So and once again, we're going to go really deep into that in the tier 2 training that's coming up, but I'm going to use an example of and kind of talk through the mechanics of a plan that I would create that has kind of a very, kind of a similar feel and really kind of follows that check-in, check-out process. When we just talk about strong tier 2 interventions, it's really, we want to make sure that we are using kind of basing them as an extension of what's happening in tier 1 already. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel or, kind of go into this super, off the kind of beaten path plan for a student, which might be necessary in tier 3 to really hone in on their, more individualized timing of reinforcement and needs. But how can we utilize what's already sort of in place and then just bring it closer to a student, increase the accessibility to reinforcement for expectations, and just kind of just like I said, just bring that tier 1 just a little bit more personalized to that student. But still, with the expectation that, most likely, this is being run in a classroom with many other students. So, understanding the, realistic, or just the reality and the ability for the staff members that are able to support the plan, being able to do it to fidelity. I think that's a huge piece. So I just use an example, for instance, if, most students in a classroom kind of tier 1 plan are working in a way that they, are working for a weekly incentive, maybe like shopping at the store or something like that based on, their, reinforcement for expectations daily or throughout the day. Maybe for their tier 2 student, they're still able to shop at that store, but daily or every couple days, still kind of based on the same plan, but they're able to touch reinforcement a little sooner. So again, not reinventing the wheel, but just kind of bringing that reinforcement a little bit higher for that student that needs it. So when we're creating any sort of sheet or check-in, check-out plan, we need to ensure that the measurement for those expectations is objective and clarified amongst all staff members. So it's and then. And I actually should have said and clarified to the staff members and student to really understand what it is that needs to happen in order to get, kind of the thing that they're working for. I really also always like to highlight that we need to ensure reinforcement is personal and valued appropriately for the specific student and the effort it takes to engage in the behavior. If it's possible to take baseline, that's great. In terms of sometimes I'm okay, can we do a practice run of a check-in, check-out sheet or a daily sheet one day to be what would the student get if they were to run it? Or you could even maybe do that for a couple periods of a day. And so that we can best, kind of set the goal for that student. And then when in doubt, I'm always okay, no matter what, let's set it really, really low and attainable. And we'll talk a little bit further about that so that the student touches reinforcement on day 1. I've had a couple of circumstances where, teams have really good, a good plan in place, but the goal set really high for the student. And again, always kind of with that best intention, right? Because they're well, we know they can do it. Which is true, and we know, and we always want to think of our students being really capable. But if they're not doing that or meeting the goal for many days in a row, they don't, they may not be quite motivated or not even really understand what it is they're working for if they can't kind of touch that reinforcement. So I always note that we kind of set the bar a little lower, hope, see them kind of mastering it. And then because we're monitoring the data as a team, being like, whoa, students, doing amazing. Let's up that goal. And then, always with the idea that we're trying to eventually fade the plan or the need for the plan potentially, or just adjust it in a way that's going to kind of push the student to the next level. So, we're going to monitor the data, and we're always going to adjust the data, the plan using data-driven decisions. So this is an example. Sorry, this isn't probably can I make this? Oh, sorry. I'll kind of read what this says, and you'll have links to some of these example sheets within the slideshow too. But this is an example of a daily chart, or even a check-in type of chart. Check-in check-out type of chart that might be used. Again, I try to use language that is being talked about within the classroom already. So we would expect that tier 1 language is, from the matrix would be kind of included here, because, we already know that those things should be being taught and reinforced anyways throughout the classroom day for a student. So they should have some familiarity, or maybe, we're going to really hone in on helping them be more familiar. So in this case, we're going to look at the expectations of, that respect. So in this case, the classroom is using the term, as for tier 1, they're using that whole body listening, kind of like, teaching piece, the eyes watching, ears listening, heart caring, all, brain thinking, that really covers all of the things that sort of describe what my body should be doing, within the classroom. That safety piece, so having gentle hands with people and property, and then responsible. So, something that I've kind of adjusted most of my plans to include is, noting that responsibility piece for a student. So ideally that's them following their school schedule, right? So with best effort, if, or their best effort, how that looks. But then also noting that it's okay to take a safe break or use a coping strategy. If that's what the body needs at that time, that's also a responsible choice. But we want to encourage you, or encourage the student to be requesting that in an appropriate way. So again, utilizing, some system that reinforcement. In this case, the student's working for a dino icon. But, I'm responsible, I'm following my school schedule, or I'm using one of these coping strategy, or I'm getting to my safe space, or I'm asking for a walk, or, what of those things that, again, need to be determined in a way that is most appropriate for that setting, and that can be, done in a way that's easy enough, with depending on where the student is. I know there's not always extra staff support to kind of do this, but if they can be taught to go to, maybe a quiet space, or even take out a bin of items that are, helpful to kind of chill, or even maybe put their head down for a moment, whatever that is, we would teach and make sure that they know what those safe options are. But again, just really, really honing in on, it's responsible to do your work, and it's responsible to say when you need something else. And it's in a way that's not, super disruptive or unsafe, ideally. So I always just like to kind of include that, as I think it's important. In this case, we'll talk, so I'll go here. So, and I can kind of toggle back. So essentially I always, parameters for how a student earns the, kind of their goal for a period of time. Maybe it's, periods based, or in this case, it was just every half an hour or so. Those need to be really defined, right? So again, this needs to be specific to the student. So, in this case, the parameters were set such that, the student could receive approximately, is as close to that as we can, 5 or less positively framed reminders for that respect piece. Safety is often less reminders, right? And we would, because we really don't want to, see any unsafe behavior, especially, in a school setting. But, if I could say, Joey, chair goes down, this is your, one reminder, please put it back where, push it back in, and the student does it, giving them that one reminder. And then perhaps if that doesn't redirect that, the student would not earn for for that period. And then that responsible, in this case, the student had a parameter of 3 or less reminders. These are, again, elements within a plan when we talk about fading or making it a little bit more like rigorous or increasing expectations. This is also a point that we might be able to do that, right? So maybe right now we start realistically, because a student might, shout out quite a bit or have behaviors other than that whole body listening. 5 is probably a realistic, starting point, but maybe, as we kind of see that getting better at the 5, maybe we go down to 4 reminders in order to earn it, maybe then 3. So, I think there's always layers within a plan that can be kind of pushed when we're looking at the data and understanding how, if a student's doing well with the current plan. Again, setting daily goals based on student preference. Goals would be set based on, sorry, is there a question? Okay, so where a student is, and then also developing the goals for what they're working on based on student preference. And I know we talked about like function-based reinforcement, right? So, if a student, seems to want to access like a tangible or attention from others, how can we provide that as part of their reinforcement? In a classic check in, check out, right? They have the opportunity to check in with a preferred adult or a adult that, they have, respect for and a liking for. They have that opportunity for some really built-in attention at the beginning and the end of the day. And then for some students that might not be what their jam is. Maybe they have the opportunity to, quickly check in, but they're really working for, the opportunity to engage with peers in a positive way, or access a fun activity such as, like a tech, or maybe they want to, a treat or something like that. Or, just a break from work, kind of like, some built, or, the opportunity for some escape from a certain setting, or, the classroom or whatnot. So making sure that, again, our goals are based on what is realistic for a student, and then making sure that the reinforcement that they're trying to access is truly what that student wants. Because if the goals are too high, or the reinforcement is not motivating, we're likely not going to see those behaviors, those expected behaviors, occur in the way that we want to see them. So, and maybe those change too. That's always, I know tricky, but I feel like that comes up a lot too, in the sense of, this was working for a couple of weeks and now it's not. Students might become satiated on a specific, reinforcement. So I always say, look, reinforcement lists should be also, in addition to the plan being kind of fluid, reinforcement lists and preference lists need to be fluid as well. We need to be ready to be like, all right, what's something, and I feel like I've seen some really cool options for students to work for that, I've always like, I got to keep that in my list. Like I saw a student recently got to when they earned, their goal was to put on a robe, that they brought a really cozy robe and sit and, kind of snuggle into a comfort area. But the robe was sort of the picture on what they were working for and what their goal was for when their break, came, and if they'd met their goal. So I was like, really into that. That's just a fun, again, thinking what does a student want, and what might make that time extra special for, putting in that work. I always just note, and I usually, as part of a plan, I would always put, kind of language or a script that, staff should make sure that they're utilizing. So if unexpected behaviors occurring, right, we're needing to give some of those reminders, always using that positively framed language. For earning dinos when you are in your seat, coloring the circle, all of those, what is a student supposed to be doing versus you won't get your dino if you keep crawling on the floor. We want to avoid language like that. So again, I just note that when we talk about really being explicit and clarifying what a plan looks like for all those involved, because again, there's a whole team of us, kind of working on this plan, and there's, potentially a good amount of, multiple staff members that are, supporting, or potentially, a sub here or there. We want to really make sure that the parameters are set. So, after we got the plan running, we've got that data and progress monitoring. We want to know how often the expected behavior is happening, when and where is it not happening. and that, we have to take that data consistently, and we need to be reviewing it often. So, I always note that a team should be meeting every 2 to 4 weeks, generally to start at the start of a plan. We'd probably want to look at it, as often as possible, maybe closer to that 2-week mark, so that we can adjust supports as needed quickly, right? And then this is our opportunity to say, okay, what happens, like, it's working, like he's got it. Like, I always love when, kids that, will kind of master a plan, even like, I've had circumstances where like they know they can get 2 reminders, but they kind of are able to sort of stop getting that, before they get that 3rd. And I'm like, all right, we know that. Let's make that 1 reminder, and kind of as we're kind of learning what the student, how the student buys into a plan and how they master it, ideally, right? And then we look at, if it's not working, where are we still finding challenges? Is it the value of the reinforcement? Is it the timing of the reinforcement? Is it maybe a kind of a snafu or a communication kind of gap between the staff members running it? Do we need to sort of come back together and retrain on the language and be really explicit in what it is that we're trying to teach the student and how we're measuring it? Again, one person's definition of safe might look really different than another person. So making sure that we're like, okay, would we measure this the same way? Making sure that the team's on kind of board that way. Sorry guys, not the best. I was just trying to show an example of a kind of a completed sheet here. So you can kind of see, that the student, has earned in certain intervals, not for others. They met their goal that day based on, the goal that was set at this time. It was like 14 out of 21 kind of early on in the plan. They got, more than that. In this case, the student was actually working to kind of align with the tier 1 system that was being utilized in the classroom, the color ladder. So, they actually we were using this chart to indicate if they got to move their clip up, which was really motivating for that student. And they had like really a lot of pride when they got to do that, and also go home and show mom and dad or others that they had gotten that. So that's sort of a good example of, utilizing, we're already using the clip system, that classroom was using the clip system. This student needed, a little bit more of like an objective measurement of how they could get their clip moved up. But they, they really wanted that. So that really worked for that student. And again, it worked because it was organic within the classroom kind of plan. So this is I know this is probably like not the best, but this is an example of how we might break down like from AM to PM, the percentage of those intervals, right? We're looking at 30-minute intervals. Were they quiet? Or kind of were they engaging in that respect behavior and that safe behavior? Were they doing their work or taking a break? And then we also were noting some other things like, was a break needed? Was additional support coming in? Just as another data piece for understanding how the plan was working. And then this is how we kind of reviewed the progress, right? So we looked at like baseline dates. We looked at the percentage of those expected behaviors, how, often they were occurring. And then we also looked at those incidents resulting in additional staff support or removal. So from baseline to kind of our next data review, it's sort of interesting, right? Because the data on the expectations sort of stayed similar, actually kind of went down a little bit. But the incidents resulting in additional staff or removal from the classroom went from 8 out of 10 days to 1 out of 9 days. So just another way to kind of look at like data where we're kind of like, okay, we're not like, it didn't drop, significantly, but it didn't necessarily go up, which is obvious our goal. But these huge kind of like incidences that are a little more extreme are coming down. So like, I would consider that, like we were like, all right, we're going to stick with things as they are and kind of keep monitoring data. We're not going to make any changes because we feel like we're kind of, we're seeing good results in one kind of portion of this student's plan. Any questions there? The last piece I have is just kind of touching on, when we're kind of ready to do a functional behavior assessment or move into that tier 3 intervention plan. And we can have a couple minutes even after this, but so again, we're making the assumption that tier 1 classroom supports are really strong and consistent. We've trialed a tier 2 plan to fidelity for a period of time based on those decision-making roles that, we're all working together on. And we're still not seeing the type of success or the type of mastering of the plan. Maybe we're still seeing some really high level incidences that, result in reactive response, restraint or seclusion or incident reports that are, significant. This could also be, something if a parent requests it. And then I always just note that we want to have parental consent anytime we're, kind of moving in and working with a specific student. And then, potentially an IEP team decision, maybe it's part of an eval for a student that's, being considered for special education. So those are some, but from a PBIS perspective, specifically, we're thinking, okay, we've tried this, we've looked at data, the teams come together. I think it's time to dive in a little bit further. We thought we were kind of hitting on these functions that the student, the functions of behavior that we were kind of assuming or kind of guessing that the student was trying to get, but we're still not quite seeing that. That change. So, we move into those tier 3 supports, which we know are that, super individualized, more intensive support to improve the behavioral and academic outcomes. So the key components being that the function-based assessment of an FBA, wraparound supports, and then that cultural and contextual fit. Again, those are elements that, we'll dive deeper in, as more training comes. But to just touch on the FBA, so it's the process. Again, the term process, I just want to kind of reiterate because, in my experience, oftentimes the FBA is not a solution. It's an information gathering process. And from the FBA, we're going to develop the BIP, the behavior intervention plan, that tier 3 plan that's really specified for the student. So again, that process for kind of developing this sort of formal report is the functional, that initial step where we're at the end of the report that we pull together all these different assessments. We're making an informed hypothesis. So we're identifying those problem behaviors in really specified definitions, and then we're trying to decide how to improve or eliminate those behaviors. So that consists of direct and indirect assessment. So going in, observing a student, looking at that ABC data, looking at that other kind of the way that we're collecting baseline data otherwise, and in some forms, actually like a check-in, check-out or a daily sheet is a really good jumping off point because we're already really getting some daily data that's going to be really informative. So I feel like that tier 2 process is really also setting the scene for potentially moving into tier 3 if we needed to, because we're awesomely already taking like a ton of data on the student and the expectations. So not to think that a tier 2 is all for naught. Like you're already kind of really honing in on that student information. And then, interviews, surveys, again, I said observations, pulling all of those things together, and coming up with that hypothesis. What is the most likely maintaining consequence following target behavior? And then from that, we want to understand how to, better prevent that unwanted behavior, teach appropriate behavior, positively reinforce that behavior, reduce rewards or reinforcement for unwanted behavior. And then obviously paramount usually would be that ensuring student safety. So when we look at the function of behavior and doing an FBA, we really want to hone in on like one behavior or a set of behaviors that we think are functionally related, right? Because it's hard to be trying to understand if there's behaviors occurring that might have different functions. So understand how to prioritize what behavior we want to look at first. And generally speaking, we can kind of go through like a hierarchy, obviously being like safety being number one. So any of those, aggressive behaviors, we would really hone in on first. But, oftentimes we might see students sort of have a chain of behaviors start occurring. We start to see some of those precursors, and then we kind of move up the ladder to our more, intensive ones to see if, they're potentially trying to see, if that their needs can be met. So, I think over time I've kind of even developed some target behavior definitions that are more like a behavioral incident that includes kind of some of these one or more of these things like aggression, yelling, property disruption, things like that. Because when I've taken some baseline data, I see that they're always kind of happening at the same time and following the same trigger. So, that's just, some food for thought, but we don't want to be looking at like a million different behaviors. We want to really hone in on the most important target behavior to start. So again, that target behavior must be, explicitly and clearly defined. It has to be measurable by multiple people. And then, we're trying to understand at this point, if we're looking at tier 3, what is our most important focus behavior that we need to really kind of individually target for that student. So again, just based on time, I just did like an example hypothesis, just kind of pulled out of an FBA. So again, thinking about what, we're looking at those triggers, the target behavior, and then what's happening afterwards. So like, I'll just read this first one. So, that was after we pulled together all the pieces of the assessment, where we're going to say, when a demand is placed or direct attention is removed, student engages in the target behaviors because in the past, the behaviors have resulted in attention from staff members or peers. So from that, I'm going to go into a recommendation that's, a dense schedule of positive reinforcement for expected behaviors, ensuring that I'm really finding opportunity for staff to provide attention to that student, both in a contingent way, right? Like if they earn it, and then also I would, add an element in that plan to be, providing non-contingent reinforcement for a student in the form of attention. If we kind of know that's our hypothesis, where are opportunities that we can provide that to a student? And then from there, we're going to go into our BIP. Again, this is just really brief, but I always just note, when we've made a hypothesis and now we're in that behavior intervention planning that's individualized for a student, we're going to include those defined target behaviors or behavior. I always want to include the functional hypothesis from the FBA, right? Because now we're kind of moving into this new document, but we need to know what that functional hypothesis was so that all staff members and those working with the student still have a good understanding of that. We're going to include proactive recommendations, right? So what's our reinforcement protocol for expected behaviors? How are we going to teach replacement behaviors proactively? And then also reactive response plan or that crisis management plan. We need to make sure that staff is trained and consistently responding to, because even though we want our plans to work quickly and on day one, where it's likely that we're going to be, while we're kind of teaching and reinforcing these sort of new replacement behaviors for students, it's likely that these, we're still going to need to respond to some of these higher need behaviors or these really challenging behaviors. So we need to have a consistent response to that, such that we're not giving kind of maybe potentially inconsistent reinforcement for the negative behavior, those maladaptive behaviors. We're going to also still have that data progress monitoring plan, again, based on kind of your decision rules and your team plan from, we've moved from tier 2 to tier 3, maybe you're reviewing the data a little sooner. And then always ensuring that our document is fluid and it's up to date and on the current status of like what's happening with that student. So that's all I've got for today. Thank you for your time. If anyone has any questions, I know I kind of spewed a lot of thoughts and info. Please let me know, or feel free to reach out to me. I've included my email address here.
And we definitely want to open up, like a question and answer time. Our care teams, we have a lot of students that we're dealing with, and what specific questions do you have for Kathleen in her, presenting the tier 2 interventions and strategies and tier 3? And please feel free just to open up your mic and ask the question.
So my question is for the larger group of all you amazing care team folks, is that do you typically have access to functional behavioral assessments that Kathleen or others might have developed for some students that you're also serving on the care team, just to kind of support alignment and consistency, or maybe just make sure even your school-based clinician from ComQuest Child and Adolescent are able to see it and kind of connect dots for consistency? Just curious.
Okay, nobody's going to talk, so I will.
Thank you, Sherry.
While we were enjoying this fantastic presentation, a little fellow who is going to get an FBA, I think starting today, we could easily hear in my office, and he's across the office in another room behind a closed door. So I don't know exactly what access there's going to be. We had one student who went through the process several years ago. And I was, as a school counselor, I was part of that team, but I don't know that we opened it up to the entire care team. With this student, I'm not sure what the plan is for that, but I would be curious to know what the plan is for who all is going to be involved. In general, I don't know, maybe it's because of the size of our school. We don't involve more people than is necessary. But I don't know. I'll have to ask about that. I don't know how to answer Patty's question is my bottom line.
No, and I agree. It really should be just for information that the people involved need to know. And, whenever there's, somebody else that's also supporting the student, so that they are able to see and reinforce, but not for everybody to know what's on the FBA, but if others on the care team are also supporting that same student.
I think too, I think a lot of when we're working in a care team setting and we have all of these experts around the table, I think one of the strengths that we have is that it's knowing what is behind that student. Like Sherry, like you were saying, the student is most likely going to have an FBA. It's knowing, and there might be key members on that care team that were a part of the FBA team, and it's knowing that background information. And I think of our intervention specialists that are a part of the IEP and 504 process, and they know what's on that IEP or 504. I think when you're able to bring that information to the care team table, and everything is on, it's always been on a need to know, but how then can the educational piece, when needed, pull in our school-based mental health therapists? Like, what do they need to know that's going on over here educationally, because they also have the student in an open case? So the care teams, there's a lot. Our school resource officers are at the table, our nurses are at the table. And so I think as you're thinking through these things, what we felt so powerful about having Debbie and Val and Kathleen here talking to you is there are a lot of things happening outside of the care team, and then boom, all of a sudden, Cape Port is referred to the care team, and it's the care team group that's able to put the pieces of information together. They might not be sharing explicitly what's on all of these documents, but they're bringing the information together with all of these experts around the table to think through what might be a good intervention or strategy to help that student. And so your work is so valuable, but in the same breath, it's complex. And I think we're just trying to help you think through each individual student. Because if we could give you a checklist that says Kay was referred to the care team, check, she's going to do A, B, and C. And then Patty was referred to the care team and Debbie was referred to the care team. But what makes the work more complex is that you have to talk about each individual student and then come up with a plan. And so, so we're just thankful for all the work that you're doing. And I want to be very mindful of your time and show you just a few other slides. But does anyone else have any other comments or thoughts? Or you're welcome to put it like in your attendance link. We asked a couple of things, but any other comments? I would like to go through just a few other slides before we step away. You guys are usually a chatty bunch. I'm telling you, you just are a chatty bunch. If you do have any other, oh, go ahead. Was somebody going to say something?
Oh, okay, it's Debbie. I was just going to say, like, I love your comment about the team approach. And Kathleen, I think, made the point that it is, I mean, when you have a close team that is interacting with that student on a regular basis, you want to think about everybody who impacts that student throughout the day and what role that they can play in the child's in supporting that student. So if that student has a teacher that they may have had last year, or maybe Officer Taylor has formed a relationship with a student, and he could be, you know, reinforce, or he can support that student in just incidental ways throughout the day. So I think that FBA is a time to really think about what that student's interests are, what their motivations are, and how can everyone support this student in the goal that's trying to be achieved. So, I mean, I haven't, and I know we have got a lot of parents and a lot of tough family situations, but I would say that I have never met a family that didn't want to do the best they could for their child. But sometimes I think families don't have a concrete way. They don't know exactly what they need to do to support that goal. So if we're not involving families, at least trying to involve families, I think that's a missed opportunity as well. So really wrapping services around a student once you get to tier 3, an FBA, VIP, I think is important.
Thank you. Thank you. And once again, I want to be mindful of your time. So just a couple of things for you to take a little peek at is that Kathleen's slides are embedded on this particular slide. So we have those available for you. She was talking a lot about check-in and check-out. And so if you want to dig just a little bit deeper, she was giving this resource that she utilizes. So please feel free. And sometimes you just need some quiet time just to walk through some things. I know it's, you know, during a meeting, we're trying to listen and we're trying to process, but you know, we really want to give you some very, very valuable resources that might be helpful to you. And in those daily plans or those check-in and check-outs, Kathleen has given examples of all of these, from those of you working with your elementary kids to middle school, intermediate middle school, junior high, and high school students. So we have different examples of these. And then just once again, just looking at some key practices, and when you get a chance to just sit down and just take a few minutes and just read through these. This is from ODE and the PBIS piece. So just some think abouts as you're thinking about each of your kids. Key practices in the tiers, key practices in the tier 3, which Kathleen was sharing with you. We are working on a website, so if you get a chance to take a peek at that, you're welcome to do so. Here's our resource, or here's contact information for all of us today. And once again, if you for your certificate, there's that information as well. But I really want to just say to Kathleen, thank you so much for just taking time out of your day to talk to us. You know, Kathleen is a member of the Day Integrated Learning Center's care team. So she understands the complexities of what all of you are working with your students and with your families. And so we are very appreciative of you taking this time. And Debbie and Val, taking the time also to kind of guide us and lead us. We're in a really interesting year with care teams because, I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to lead you where Debbie and Val and your Tier 2 PBIS training is going to eventually take you. And so I've always believed in trying to be progressive in your thinking. I have always believed in trying to support you in everything that you're doing. And so just know that you have all of us. There's a team behind you, from Carla, Chrissy, and Lynette to, the work that Patty's doing. But there's this team at the ESC that we're behind you. And if you ever need us, please reach out to us. If you want to invite us to your care team meetings virtually, we're now in this virtual platform. If you have difficult students or situations, please reach out to us. So with that, I just want to say thanks to all of you. We, on behalf of those of us at the ESC and our presenters today, we wish you just a very, very happy Thanksgiving. We hope that you're able to take some time for yourself and your family and your friends and just, reboot and rejuvenate whatever it is that you need to do. But just know that we're here for you and we appreciate you. So with that, our next meeting, Patty will have the Counselor Cafe meeting set up in December. Then we're just kind of going back and forth. And then January, we'll be back for Care Team Roundtable. And then March, we'll be back for Care Team Roundtable. So with that, we say goodbye to all of you and thank you and happy holidays. We appreciate you. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.